Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this afternoon's Council of American Ambassadors virtual roundtable via Zoom with Ambassador Shefali Razdan Duggal, who until January was U.S. Ambassador to the Kingdom of the Netherlands. Ambassador Razdan Duggal resides in the San Francisco area and was an appointee of President Biden's administration, serving from September of 2022 until just past January. She has a remarkable record of service and achievement with a wide range of organizations. For example, before assuming her ambassadorship, she was the San Francisco committee member for Human Rights Watch and served on the Leadership and Character Council at Wake Forest University and the National Advisory Board of Inside Washington at her alma mater, Miami University of Ohio. She worked on Biden for President 2020 and was National Committee co-chair, of Women for President Biden. She also served as the Deputy National Finance Chairman of the Democratic National Committee. She's previously served on the board of directors of Emily's List, as a presidential appointee on the Holocaust Memorial Council, and in other impressive roles. Ambassador Razdan Duggal was born in Haridwar, Uttar Pradesh, India. She's a Kashmiri Pandit by ethnicity, and her family moved to the United States actually before she was born. She was born here.
No, I was
No?
born in India.
Oh,
Yeah,
I'm sorry. I
I'm an
thought,
immigrant to the US. Yeah.
okay, well, thank you. She has a BS from Miami University of Ohio, which also awarded her an honorary doctorate, and an MA in media ecology from New York University. Today, she will be interviewed by Ambassador Jim Rosapep, a veteran member of the Council of American Ambassadors, who served for President Clinton as ambassador in Romania and is now state senator from Maryland, representing the Washington suburbs. So, Jim and Ambassador Shefali, welcome. Please
Take it away.
carry it on.
Thanks a lot, Philip, and thanks to everybody for joining today. This is going to be really interesting. I want to start on the news. The Dutch government fell apart this week, and my expertise on Dutch politics is very thin. So, Ambassador, if you'd give us a little bit of the background of what is the government, how did it come together, why did it fall apart, what's the state of Dutch politics, and what does that mean for America and for the world?
Sure. Well, first, I want to thank you, Ambassador Hughes, Ambassador Rosapap, and please, if you both feel comfortable, please call me Shefali. That's what it's just so much easier for everybody.
Fair. I'm Jim.
Jim, thanks. Okay, so yes, so this is a very timely conversation we're having because on Tuesday, the Dutch government fell. So it was in place for 11 months. When I was there, it actually had fallen as well. So in the summer of 2024, Rutte 4, which he's the second longest, he was the second longest serving democratically elected prime minister in Europe, Mark Rutte, who now is the NATO Sec-Gen. And so his government, so we just call that Rutte 4. So that fell in the summer. And so it took some time, and then the new government came into place, and that government did shift to the right. It was kind of a center-right government before, and then under Mark Rutte, and then it shifted to the right. And there were four, and I actually have some notes so I could speak coherently about this and not be all over the place. So there was a four-party coalition with the leading party being the PVV, which was Geert Wilders. And so Geert Wilders, though he was not prime minister, and there was a reason for that, and I'll explain that, his party was the leading party, won 37 of the votes out of the 150. and in the coalition. So the coalition had four parties, and I can list them, but they were all like about right or center right.
Mhm.
And so the reason why the leading party with Geert Wilders was not the prime minister is the only way that the other three coalition partners would agree to work with him, because he's very, very conservative. He's very, very right. Is if he agreed, and all the party leaders agreed, that they would not be prime minister. So the prime minister, and still is right now, the caretaker prime minister is Dick Schoof, who actually came from the intelligence space of the Netherlands. He was not a front-facing person. He was actually the person who'd worked in the government for 30 years, but behind the scenes, and was the head of AIVD, which is an intelligence service. He's an incredible human, but I don't know, even in any universe, he thought that he would be prime minister, but he became the compromise candidate. And so the party, the government fell on Tuesday because Geert Wilders, as I mentioned, the leading of the PVV, he had actually, his quote was, I signed up for the strictest asylum policies, not the demise of the Netherlands. So he had presented a 10-point plan that he wanted put into place. And I can list some of the proposals included: halt to all asylum, excuse me, temporary stop to family reunions for asylum seekers, return of all Syrians who applied for asylum or in the Netherlands on temporary visas, shut asylum centers, sending back migrants convicted of serious crimes, and having further control on the border. So basically, you hear he's very conservative. And so the leaders of the other parties, it's not that they necessarily disagreed with these things, but they wanted it to go through the parliament, through the House of Representatives, which would delay it a little bit more. And Mr. Wilders said, no, I've waited long enough. And so he came in.
Shefali, if I might, just let me ask you a question for those who are not as familiar with who he is. You say he's conservative, but conservative means different things in different contexts. It sounds like immigration is his big issue.
Yes, it is.
And where does he fit in terms of other left-right spectrum in Dutch politics and in other kinds of politics, in terms of attitude towards Russia and attitude towards the United States, attitude towards the EU, economic policy?
Correct. So he's an interesting potpourri of a human. He is anti-immigration. He's pro-Ukraine. He's anti-Russia. He actually wanted to pull out of the EU, but during the process of the government forming last summer, there was such pushback on that he dropped that. So he's kind of like, he tolerates the EU participation. And with NATO, he oscillates, but he's generally pro-NATO. So yeah, he's got a big mishmash. And I've met with him multiple times, because as my job, when I was sitting as ambassador, and I being, as I mentioned, an immigrant to the United States,
right?
Having lived from top to bottom the American dream. And I was also known at my embassy and with the Dutch to be the Dutch are known to be very direct. I consider myself to be very direct, but with rounded edges. So I'll say it, not like a hammer, but maybe like a velvet hammer. And so in the meetings that we had, I asked him, because it was very clear to our embassy, and inexplicably, he became fond of me as a person. Just seeing me on social media, like he just became fond of me, even though I represented a lot of things that maybe were not in his interest or his wheelhouse. But when we sat, we had what was originally scheduled as a 30-minute meeting, and it became an hour and a half.
Wow.
And we sat there, and I had my note takers, and they were consistently like shocked by things he was saying, but I would continue on, because that's our jobs, right? To continue and have the conversation. And I asked him the question, Jim, I asked him, I said, you have these thoughts about immigration, but you realize I'm an immigrant. to the United States. And had the United States not allowed for my story to unfold by the sheer force of faith and hard work and positive energy and goodness around me, I wouldn't be sitting as the child of a single mom who worked 2 minimum wage jobs and age 50, having been sworn in as ambassador. And I said, there have to be stories like that all over the Netherlands of the migrants, the Syrians, the Afghanis, the folks from the former, it's a former, well, it is a kingdom. So they have many former island countries and countries. And so these people are coming up to the Netherlands. And I say there have to be so many of those stories. But getting back to your question, yes, he's a mishmash of things. And so the party, so right now it's in a caretaking mode, Jim, and that they don't expect elections until they're called the snap elections into likely the end of October, the beginning of November. And the reason for that is because Parliament is not in session.
I understand.
Starting, I believe, July 1st until somewhere into September. Yeah, somewhere into September. And then they have to campaign.
Gotcha.
And so, and I can talk about the parties that are kind of leading, like who's kind of looked at as very popular right now. And I'm happy to talk about that.
Well, no, let me, I do want to talk a little bit about the political future there. And then I want to get time to, we get to some of the major U.S. issues and then questions from our participants. But just one final question on the political situation right now. And obviously, you told me you're traveling back and forth to the Netherlands a lot, so you're really keeping on top of things, which is great. But you're not the ambassador anymore, and it's not your full-time job to predict the political future like it used to be. What is your sense of Dutch politics with the collapse of this government? Is particularly Wilders? Is his party like to come out of new elections stronger or weaker? Are things likely to shift in any particular way, or is it probably a status quo election?
So no, it's not a status quo. And I do go back and forth because they're inviting me back and forth and I'm very respectful I was very respectful of my predecessor. I became very good friends with him, Piet Hoekstra. And I'm very respectful of the incoming, who he's waiting to be confirmed, Joe Popolo. He and I are friends. We were texting last night. And I do that because I think it's important for both the Netherlands and also my embassy, which is now going to be his embassy. I shouldn't say my embassy anymore. I'm sorry. I think it's important for everyone to see that there is this seamless move. So no, in terms of what's happening, I would not say it's status quo. There was a poll done in the Netherlands that something like 60% of that within the poll are happy that Mr. Wilders has pulled out, he and his ministers. They're happy because 60% felt that the country had shifted too far to the right. But of his supporters, it's something like, again, like almost close to 70-80% of his supporters are unhappy that this happened, not with him. They feel like he got stifled, and the other 20-25% feel like he didn't do enough. Now, in terms of what potentially could happen, so the three parties that are almost, if you can say, tied in popularity are his party, the center-right party, and then there's another party, the Green Left, that's not even in the coalition, but Frans Timmermans, he became the climate minister in the EU, and then he came back. He's very popular in the Netherlands. He's very popular in the EU. And so it looks like, I don't know for sure, you never know what'll happen, but it looks like it'll be between Hert and Frans Timmermans. So it's always kind of looked like it would be that, and it would be either Hert Wilders would become prime minister and it would really turn right, or Frans Timmermans would just say, oh no, we're going back to the center, even center left.
Wow.
And so that's what's happening right now.
It could be a very consequential election. Well, we will stay tuned to that. I want to keep in touch with you on it. Let me switch over to the major U.S. international issues that you dealt with. Let's just start with Ukraine. Obviously, all over Europe in particular, Ukraine has its own politics. in a country. And obviously, the Netherlands, unlike where I served, Romania, which is borders Ukraine, it's a lot farther away. But tell us a little bit about what your experience was in terms of working with the Dutch on the Ukraine issue.
No, absolutely. That was actually one of the biggest things that we worked on. So when I came, and I know we'll go over the different issues, but Ukraine, actually, the illegal invasion happened right around when I got announced to be ambassador. And so when I landed, that of course was a huge issue, and of course continues to be. So the Netherlands is actually one of the largest providers of both humanitarian aid, military aid, to the Netherlands. And along with, as I mentioned, it's wonderful for President Zelensky that the former prime minister is now the head of
good point.
NATO now. And so the Netherlands actually was very involved, and they increased. Now, I think we're wrapping this around what happened with the fall of the government. Or are you just generally asking what
No, just generally. I mean, were they reluctant participants? Were they enthusiastic participants?
Enthusiastic, absolutely. There was a huge, I would say, within the public, there was an incredible and almost unequivocal support of Ukraine. Now, for the reason for that is, as many of the folks likely on this call as well know, because when you're on the continent, they feel it. It's only like a few hours flight away, that as soon as Putin continues his onward march, to the West, it will at some point continue. And so they were very enthusiastic. They're, that they were, before Ukraine, somewhere around like 1.6 GDP for the,
Defense.
NATO commitment. But then once Ukraine happened, they became incredible. I'm sure they always were, but they became much more passionate about their defense. They increased, they're actually over 2% right now. Their goal is to raise it up to 3.5 very soon.
Wow.
And they increase, and I know we've got the 5% conversation that will happen in a couple of weeks in The Hague, which is very complicated with the government having fell. But they increased their defense budget. They increased it to 21 billion. And it's incredible. And they were very passionate. They were consistently, I would say, Prime Minister Rutte at the time, he was actually one of the biggest cheerleaders to other NATO countries and frankly EU countries to be even further engaged. And so we were in our conversation, my conversation was always coming back to, fulfillment of because they have the money to, create the weapons, but they don't have the parts. And so they don't have all the parts. So that was a conversation that their ministry was always having with me in terms of fulfillment back, coming back from the United States. So it was a huge part of what I was doing.
Well, that's fascinating. It sounds like, and I've seen this in other European countries, that Putin's invasion of Ukraine has backfired in such a huge way. He was hoping to not extend NATO to his borders. He was hoping to weaken the Western alliance. And it sounds like an example is the Dutch are much more in on NATO and the defense than they were before the invasion. Is that a fair statement?
That's absolutely true. And even within their armed forces, one of their goals in the next couple of years is to increase their armed forces it's a population of 18 million. So when I say 17,000 to 18,000 increase, it may not sound like as much in our world, but for a country of 18 million that was not traditionally thinking about military, it's incredible. So they're absolutely, they unified the country in a way that perhaps didn't exist. I would even say, I had this conversation with several of the generals there. I asked them, have you found there to be a greater respect for the military in the Netherlands after what happened in Ukraine and how the country has unified so unequivocally, and that's something also that has changed. There's a greater interest in young people joining the military.
Wow, I don't think that's true in Russia today. That's very interesting and encouraging. Let's switch over to another big foreign policy crisis, which was the Hamas attack on Israel and the military incursion into Gaza. So, how is all of that seen in the Netherlands, both by the people and by the government? And how were you, for the United States, involved in those issues in the Netherlands?
Absolutely. And I actually, this made me think of something else in terms of going back to Russia. Another big thing that I was very consistently working on around the Ukraine invasion is our relationship with the ICC, of which I know that they are sanctioned again, but at the time
the ICC is the International Criminal Court.
International Criminal Court, because there were, of course, investigations. There was the arrest warrant that happened with Putin, and also the woman who was in charge of, frankly, kidnapping the children all through Ukraine and bringing them back to Russia. So we were involved in that a fair amount. Had so many CODELs come to the ICC to talk with the folks over there about what was happening.
Because the ICC is based in The Hague, right?
The ICC, yeah, it's called the City of, oh my gosh, Justice.
Yeah.
And, oh my gosh, I should know this, I forgot. But it is Peace and Justice, the City of Peace and Justice. And because the ICC is based there, the ICJ is based there, the Iran Tribunal was based there. It has all of the largest courts there. So that was another thing I was doing a lot, is having this really productive, very positive relationship with the ICC around Ukraine. Now, in terms of Gaza, that was definitely fairly complicated. We had a great relationship with the Israeli embassy. The ambassador and I, of course, became very, very good friends. But the big thing we were working on there was with the ICJ, the International Court of Justice. And so the big case that was happening over there was around the F-35 parts, because there's a warehouse in the Netherlands that houses U.S. parts for the F-35. And then, there's the F-35 agreement with multiple countries around the world.
Actually, I don't really know. Give us a little background on that.
Sure. So basically there are parts that were in the Netherlands, U.S. parts that were in the Netherlands, not that many, but, not a huge warehouse, but we were housing these. And then and that's just not in the Netherlands. It's, these warehouses around the world. And these parts are sent then to other F-35 country partners that are, making the F-35 planes. So there was a lot of conversation about these parts that were being sent. Should they be sent to Israel? Israel is part of the F-35 program.
Oh.
But there was multiple court cases that were being brought in the ICJ about if the Netherlands should be part of this. And so the US was heavily involved in those cases. I will also say, and I know, Jim, you and I briefly spoke about this at another occasion, that with what was happening with in Gaza and with Israel, there were, as in the United States, there were protests everywhere. In the Netherlands, there were protests at all the universities. They were on the street. And so being an ambassador, as you all are as well, we're here irrespective of what our own beliefs are. I always say I was in full alignment with President Biden and the Biden-Harris administration, because that's my job. And also that's what I do. And everywhere I went, it wasn't a matter of just, when the aggression got high, it wasn't just a matter of people feeling angry with the United States. It became exceptionally personal for the female ambassadors around the world. And
Oh.
and there were, I mean, the level of aggression, and it wasn't just what's the US doing, the things you hear. They made it personal. And they said extremely offensive sexual things in front of hundreds of people as I'm speaking. And so there were multiple times that we had to call back to state and let them know, you need to be aware that I'm not sure what the male ambassadors are going through, but the female, I am going through this a lot, and my team got extremely protective of me because, and the Dutch military that were protecting me, like they had never seen like the things that were said to me. And so along with the policy aspect of what we were doing, which was extremely important, and we were also, there was also this personal angle, but there were, in terms of the hostages, there were often hostage families that were coming to the Netherlands to, because they knew about these cases that were happening in the courts, whether they went to go protest in front of them or whatever the case is. And we would meet with them. I always met with them. And I was there to listen because that was my job. And so, yeah, that was the other thing that I was doing.
Did you run into physical threats during that period?
Well, not physical threats, Jim, but like I'll give you an example of the one that really set off alarms everywhere. It was election night, and I was giving, neutral, the importance of voting, speeches, kinds of things. And there was a comedian impersonator. One was doing Vice President Harris, one was doing, at that point, candidate President Trump, and the one who was doing Trump, he says, and this is like in front of thousands, of people that were in this room and watching online also, and said, and I had spoken just before him, and it was like a very nice speech. It was like democracy, all those things. And he said, the U.S. ambassador is here. And he started talking about some issues. And then he said, Shefali, now again, I say call me Shefali, but this is unusual for him to call me, he said Shefali. And he said, just like Kamala, I want to grab her and just said it.
Wow.
And everyone, it was pin drop silent. I was in a state of shock. And I didn't know, I was confused. And then everyone rushes me out. And then I'm a human. I started crying. And so we dealt with it in like 6th and 7th floor. Several folks reached out, but I'm just saying that we had the policy things, but there was a lot of this that was, again, one of my other girlfriends who was an female ambassador, she went through stuff too. I don't know the level of how far it got. With mine, it got far.
Wow.
So
thank you for telling us that, because that was not my experience when I was an ambassador. So I'm sorry that was part of your experience. I'm sure a lot of your experience was great.
It's okay.
It was not.
It happens.
Let me ask you one more question about Gaza and Israel. So what was public opinion like, and what was the government policy on those?
Of course.
Separate from.
Yeah, the government policy, the Dutch government policy was, very much alignment with the United States in terms of we need to understand the source of what happens, which was on October 7th, and we need to support Israel. That was the government policy.
Mm-hmm.
I would say civil society was very split. And it started perhaps more pro-Israel. And then as time progressed, as they were watching how things were unfolding, I think that might be happening in the United States as well, and how things were unfolding. I would say the tide turned a bit. And I would also say that I would even say it was by age demographic. The young people, there was no question. The universities were they had to shuffle me in back doors, get me out, because the students were angry, and they were yelling, calling me the B word, which to me, that's nothing compared to like what the other thing was. But yeah, I would say young people pretty uniformly seem to not be supportive of what the US and the Netherlands were doing. Older people, a little bit more conservative, I guess. So yeah, it varied.
Great. Actually, one last question before we open it up to everybody else, and that is, you got a tulip named after you.
Oh yeah, did you want to talk about China too, or no?
We'll come back in the questions to China.
Okay.
We want to get to the tulip. I want to get to the tulip before we open it up to everybody else. I've never had a tulip named after me, so I'm very. How does that work?
So, thank you for asking. I love that story, actually. So the Dutch named a tulip after me on International Women's Day 2024, which is March 8th. So and I'll tell you how it happened. I'm actually the only ambassador from any country they ever named a tulip. The tulip is very precious to the Dutch because I effectively say it's their bald eagle. It's like, it's very precious to them. And so, it was an incredible honor. It's fuchsia pink because they asked me what color I'd want, and pink is my favorite color. And so they force bloomed a brand new one for me. And it's been in the largest tulip garden in Europe. They've shown it 2 years. That's actually why I went back a couple of weeks ago, because the Dutch were like, we want you to come back and look at it again. So how it happened was, the Dutch and also why state was like very happy with this, though it sounds like cute, but they were, because it was a reflection of how the Dutch felt that we were doing business, right? Like how we were how my team, we were all ambassadoring, and so they really liked it. And so how it happened was at the Independence Day party in 2023. So I had only been there maybe 7 months at that point, and everyone kind of saw how I did things. Like, I'm very, as I mentioned, transparent. I'm not hierarchical at all. I think I'm a warm person. I'm a transparent person. And the Dutch ended up and I'm very prepared. Like I'm always intermixing personal and professional, and they just kind of liked how I did it. And so at the Independence Day, I was shaking hands, greeting people, and then there were two gentlemen that walked through and shook my hands, and they were from the largest tulip association in the Netherlands, and I think one of the largest in the world. And as they were shaking my hand and I was greeting them and I was laughing, and then they were like, oh, by the way, we're naming a tulip after you. And then they just kept going, and I'm like, what? And so then the teams runs after them, because I'm more like, is that a joke? Is that like a Dutch, like, what are they saying? And they ran after them, and they're like, no, we've decided. And so the Dutch have named tulips after 6 first ladies, 6 activists, and then me. And so in terms of American women. And so, the Dr. Biden had one named after her. Like a couple months after me, King Charles had one named after him. So it's just an honor. Like it lives on. It's kind, it's wonderful, but it's more the reflection of how joyful they were with how we did business. And so it made my embassy happy. Like, we were just all happy. So yeah,
it makes perfect sense to me. And you mentioned to me that it got attention not just in the Netherlands.
Oh yeah. So of course, it's 6th and 7th floor. They thought it was darling. They were just like, this is so cute. And then in the US, some like associations were excited about it. Our embassy was excited. The Netherlands actually made big news, but in India, it made huge news. So as I mentioned to Philip, I was born in India, raised in the US, in Cincinnati. And I came to the Netherlands as an American, and I spoke about being Indian because that's a very big part of my internal culture as well. And so in India, I was their prize also, because to be an Indian-born US ambassador in Western Europe like their heads and their hearts were bursting. And so then when this tulip, and tulips are huge in India, they're huge, like it's a big thing in India. So when it was named, it was like it just exploded in the Indian press. It was like in, I don't know, like 70 or 80 different news pieces, and I was on the front pages, and I didn't even know, like people were sending me articles, and I was like, oh my gosh. And so it was just it was an honor. It was
Of
very
course,
nice.
I know. Of
Yeah.
course, that's very wonderful for American diplomacy. With that, Philip has his hand up. You want to ask a question, Philip, or do we have other folks who want to ask questions? You're on
Yeah,
mute.
I did to get the ball rolling here.
Great.
So, Shefali, you mentioned the public opinion trends about the response to October 7th and subsequent events in the Middle East, in Gaza particularly. And of course, one of the big issues of Geert Wilders and his party has been immigration to the Netherlands.
Yeah.
Uh, do you have any sense or information about what feedback loop that immigration issue had on the public opinion trends about this important Middle Eastern event, as far as, sort of Netherlands politics was concerned? There was a division between government policy and the popularity of government policy, especially among the young. But how does immigration perhaps uh, um, feed into that
Public opinion. Okay. So I'll go back and say, so Geert Wilders is actually very, very, very pro-Israel also. So he, when he was a young man, went to Israel and spent a summer there, and that just changed his whole life. And so he's very pro-Israel. I did want to mention that. So in terms of immigration and how the Dutch broadly feel about it, I pulled up some numbers here. So let me pull this up. So in the Netherlands, 74% of the Netherlands, of
Dutch.
the Netherlands proper, is because the Netherlands also has, it's a kingdom, so it has 6 countries, or I mean 6 islands. It also, but in the Netherlands, 74% are Dutch or Frisian, which are, Dutch. And then it's 2% are Turks, 2.38% Moroccans, 2% Surinamese. And it's like, it's small numbers, but they're there. So I would say that the country, because the reason why in the last election there was this shift to the right, why Geert Wilders was even elected, or became, I'm not, sorry, not elected, became the of the parties, the leading party to win seats in their parliament, is because people were very unhappy about the economy, loss of jobs. They can't, the Netherlands is slightly larger than West Virginia in terms of land mass. And again, as I mentioned, 18 million people, but they felt like they weren't able to get space to build homes. And so there was, that's why Geert Wilders came about, last year, how he even got in this position. So the country, in terms of immigration, certainly again split. There's the folks that view, the Netherlands as a democracy. This is what a democracy is. We accept, immigration, migrants. Most actually immigration into the Netherlands it's employment immigration. They're not, refugees. So people actually get that, don't have those numbers in mind, but they, so also in the Netherlands, they provide refugee centers. It's required by the government now, like every province, they have refugee centers, and people feel, it depends, on the part of the country. Central and northern, they're more conservative than southern, southern Netherlands, but it's split. I'd say it's trending more conservative. They are closing, they're closing. in terms of their desire of wanting people to come over their borders. So, yeah.
Let me bring it back to the question that I didn't ask the first go around, and that's China.
Yeah.
Because China is obviously the biggest deal for the United States around the world, and a big deal, I'm sure, with most embassies today.
So there was a conversation, right, with the White House that happened, I think, today.
Oh, that's right. That's exactly right.
Yeah.
So how did China policy fit into your portfolio in the Netherlands?
Again, big one. I actually, fortunately, before I went out, the State Department prepped me appropriately. I was unaware of this huge company, $290 billion company called ASML. So ASML is based in the Netherlands. It's the only company in the world that makes what's called a lithography machine. Lithography machines, they actually create, I'm getting a little technical, but there's something called DUV and EUV, and deep ultraviolet light and extreme ultraviolet light. And they basically, what they do is they etch patterns into chips. So basically, if you look at, the stream, that means lithography machines are directly the connectivity to semiconductor chips. And something like, what is it, like 98%, 96% of the world runs on some version of semiconductor chips, even like your toaster or your refrigerator.
So they basically produce the inputs and parts for chip manufacturing.
The machines. So what
machines to make them. Gotcha.
The conversation that has been happening for some years is ASML is the only company that makes these machines, and they ship them. They don't make a lot of them because they're expensive. They're like $250 million per machine. Wow. They're really expensive. So, but if you ship it to the PRC, there's that concern of dual use and also them working backwards and being able to develop these themselves. So during the Trump administration, Trump 1 administration, they disallowed the EUV, which is the newest version of the machines, to go over there. But they continued to allow the old version, the legacy machines, to go over because they're like, oh, they're old. The Biden administration agreed with that. One of the few things they agreed with. They agreed with what the Trump administration did, and they started putting all through my term there were a lot of conversations between the United States, Japan, and the Netherlands about limiting the ability of China to continue to get as many or regulating how many of the DUV machines they get. ASML wants to make money, and they're also they're called the jewel of Europe. They are actually the most profitable company in all of Europe, and it's right in the Netherlands. So the Dutch government, they had, when I say two minds, what I mean by that is, of course, security is top of their mind, but they were also worried about if ASML, the CEO, is unhappy with these regulations. He had, as they did with two other companies in the Netherlands, we're going to go to London. Why should we stay here? And so the government was trying to prevent them from doing that. So it was this constant, complicated conversation that the Department of Commerce, and the NSC were having. So I would say that topic, the Ukraine and Israel was always top of mind. But what was I working on maybe the most personally was this topic. Because I was constantly talking with their foreign ministry. I was constantly going back to state, like I was, like we had it. So, and frankly, a lot of our Codels, that was one of they all like, we need to go see ASML, and so because they needed to understand.
What is the status of the issue now?
As of right now, I'm not, I mean, like, there's probably a lot of conversations.
When you left, maybe answer that question.
When I left, it was, I mean, the Netherlands, there was always in the press, I don't know if you might recall, in the press, the perception was created by who knows who, that the United States was browbeating the Netherlands into doing what they want. And the Netherlands had to show we're our own, as they should. But we weren't browbeating them. But there's this perception that was happening because the Netherlands maybe didn't want to go as far in regulation as the United States did, because the Netherlands were trying to have that delicate balance.
Sure.
Also, their relationship with the PRC is different than the United States. Like they're huge trading partners with the PRC, and they didn't want that relationship getting punished. So when I left, it was still completely a complicated, the Netherlands had agreed, okay, yes, fine. We need to, be thoughtful of our fabrication facilities. Yes. Okay, we'll listen to the United States, but you need to understand our complications. So that's where it was when we left. Now with this, I'll just say, Jim, with this new, with the tariffs and this new kind of dynamic that's also added another layer to the PRC, I would guess that at the embassy, they're having mini implosions every day. And I'm like, thank God I'm here in San Francisco.
Well, we're glad you were there, and we're glad you're back home. I think Philip has another question.
Okay.
Yes, it just so happened the year before last when my wife and I were briefly in India as a result of a larger excursion, that India surpassed China in the estimate of the United Nations as the largest nation on earth. And you, of course, by population, that is, and you, of course, have Indian heritage. I'm curious if you could expand on the few things that you said in your earlier presentation about how much noticed and how it is assessed or understood that the United States would appoint an immigrant child from India as its ambassador to the Kingdom of the Netherlands. Doubtless there are other high-ranking Indian officials, including, for example, Kash Patel at the head of the FBI now. But how are these appointments, in this case by both administrations, resonating in both the Indian American community and in your once upon a time long ago homeland of India itself?
No, and actually my eldest brother lives in India. So almost all of my relatives are still in India. The only ones that are here are my mother, brother, and I. So I have a very strong connection back to India. In terms of all the nominations and appointments, irrespective of party, they're thrilled. They're thrilled. When they were looking at Bobby Jindal as being governor, Nikki Haley, it was incredible. And then I think there was at the Justice Department of Civil Rights right now, my very good friend she's my very close friend, Harmeet Dillon. She's a Trump person. She's she's heading up their civil rights, but the person even before that was also an Indian. So I don't know how they view necessarily the individual, if they're looking at how someone's doing the job. I'm sure for some individuals that's important, but for most people in India, they're looking at it like the US is giving these scrappy, hardworking people a chance. And it's great pride for them. It's great pride. And I'm sure, frankly, that in terms of the conversations between whomever the president is who appointed those people and Prime Minister Modi, it's, it makes him very happy, and so Prime Minister Modi was completely aware of me, that when he came to the United States this past year, I know he came, I think in 2015 also, but I briefly met him, but this time I happened to be in Washington at the same time he was coming in. So my friends at the White House said, you need to come to this, the State Department luncheon for him. So I did, and it was a room, frankly, like 400 Indian Americans. So I walked up to him and he's like, "You are an ambassador. I know you," And so he
That's
knew.
that's
Yeah.
wonderful.
And I said, yes. And then he made a joke, about like something very charming, but yeah, they're thrilled. It doesn't matter what party they're in. They're thrilled.
This immigration thing has some upsides for the United States, I think.
Well, I mean, look, and I know, there are people from both, as I mentioned, I'm very
Yeah.
bipartisan.
No,
I grew up in Cincinnati, which Philip knows is a conservative place. So I learned from a young age, very young age, to love someone who doesn't agree with me. It doesn't matter. Find commonality. It's like I said, when I sat down with Hurt Builders, I've that's what I was known for at the embassy. Like, she will find something in common with any person. Just give her enough time, and I got these so when I got there, also, I will say, Jim, the way we changed our briefings was, every ambassador, as you all know, you learn different ways. So they first learned how I process best, but then I remember telling them, I need to find out some 1 to 2 personal data points on every single person I'm meeting. And initially the teams were like, what? And then they saw how I operated in these meetings, like how we're doing this policy, but then I'll stick in,
exactly.
other things, and it develops an authentic connection. But yeah.
It's called diplomacy. And obviously you excelled at it. We have time for one more question, and that's coming from Ambassador Maisto. Are you live, John?
I hope I am.
You are. There you go.
Very good. Thank you very much, Ambassador. What a pleasure to see you, to hear you. I have a question that stems from my diplomatic experience in Latin America and the Caribbean, and it has to do with the Dutch role in that region.
Yeah.
Over the years, the Dutch, along with several European countries, have always been very interested in social issues and in terms of development in the poorer countries of Latin America. I'm wondering if, in view of what's going on right now, in terms of funding available for issues having to do with social development, issues having to do with women and gender and families. If you see from your observations of what the Dutch are all about in their foreign affairs outlook, of the current government of the Netherlands increasing its interest in these sorts of programs in faraway places. Well, Latin America isn't that far away. There's the Suriname relationship, and the Dutch have had some sort of presence in many countries in the region. So I'm wondering if you could comment on that.
Sure, absolutely. So thank you for the question. It's so nice to meet you. So yes, so just to give a brief overview, the Kingdom of the Netherlands has 6 countries. 3 of them are island countries. 3 of them are public bodies. And they have been, they've had an active presence, frankly, also militarily, part of the NATO in their increase up to 3.5%, although these islands aren't necessarily part of NATO, but because they're part of the kingdom, like they have a presence there as well. Now, the social issues, the Netherlands is interesting. They are very socially progressive. They were the first country in the world to have same-sex marriage in 2001. They also legalized euthanasia first in the world. So they're very socially progressive. They've got this interesting background, though, as you know, Mr. Ambassador, which is that because they're because they're a kingdom and they were former colonists, they have to be very, very careful. And although they have these interests in these incredibly important issues, women, gender, development, but they have to be very, very careful how they approach it with the islands, because they don't want the people of the islands to feel like there's a colonial, finger coming down at them again, even if they're very well intentioned. So they are involved. They have ministers in all of these islands that are like their ambassadors that come, they report in The Hague and they sit in The Hague. So they will be involved. With a new government, I would also say, I think it would depend if this is going to go the Geert Wilders route or the more progressive route, how much more involved they'll be.
Interesting. Shefali, Madam Ambassador, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you.
Very interesting on all counts.